Uh, Did I seriously just forget the script for this video? Amnesia, a machine for pigs. One of the many stories told in the Amnesia series, and the first story in the series I have played. As you may or may not know, in my series of learning to love games again, I choose games completely at random. And so was the case for this game as well. Since we're talking about a horror genre, I have to mention that I am not a fan of horror. I avoid it like the plague. I would also like to say that I don't get scared and that horror games are easy peasy, lemon squeezy. However, that's not the case. See, I don't do well with something hunting me or chasing me. I was genuinely not giddy with the idea of having to play a horror game. Gameplay and story. First off, I want to speak about the overall gameplay, since I think it was just okay. The story takes place in London 1899 during the Industrial Revolution on New Year's Eve, just shy of the new century. As you start the game, you're thrown into the story as Mandus, who wakes up from an intoxicated state with a blurry vision and was hearing distant voices. At this point, you can start interacting with the world, and you will be taught of the controls as you go along. There is nothing hard about them. Space to jump, Q and E to lean right or left, F for a lantern's light, control for crouching, left and right click for interacting with items in the world. Soon after you depart from the room you woke up in, you see and hear visions of your children who ask you to find them. This will be a recurring theme as you aim to see your children again. Soon, you will start noticing that something is not right. There is not a soul in sight, and there are significant tremors happening throughout the buildings. As you explore the first mansion, you come across a room with a phone in it that rings. This will be your first contact with the engineer.
Hello?
Precious eagle cactus fruit, help us.
This is not the last time you will hear of him. In this room, you will take the document you found recently, and you will pull the rifle on the wall to open up a secret passage. This signifies that the game has puzzle elements to it, tasks that you have to accomplish to continue onward in the story. You are never trapped, you just haven't figured out the mechanisms of progression. Quickly, after discovering that there are secret passageways with one-sided glass paintings behind the walls, you find one in the bathroom that leads you through a bedroom with the bed as a cage and a dark suspicious form caged in it. You continue onward in the secret passage, and you stumble across the first showcase of machinery engulfing the city. Here, you release the steam by turning the valve, only to realize later after moving back through the passageway that the cage has now been lifted, and the entity set loose. What you have just released into the world is a man-pig. Not quite man, not quite pig. Something horrible in between. As you warily follow the bloody path of the creature, you stumble onto the next phone, this time with more conversation.
Mandus, do you know me?
Who are you? Where are my children?
Trapped, Mandus, far below us. The machine is fouled, it is breached, it is flooded. The bulkheads are down, the children are engaged. If you help me, I can help you release them. Restore the power, Mandus, drain the flooding, and restart the great engines.
How? Where should I go? Hello? Hello?
Now the playing pieces have been set. You are a man called Mandus Oswald with a mission to find your children with the help of a mysterious voice over the wire communications scattered throughout the factory. As the engineer mentioned, they are far below ground, hinting that the machinery seen beforehand engulfs a lot more than just this house. You must traverse and rediscover the factory you, Mandus, have built in order to reset the machinery and to release your children, all while evading the man-pig set loose. An important factor to mention is that as you explore and progress, you find notes and audio devices as well as get glimpses of memories that piece together the past year. There are different areas to the game that you must go through, starting with the mansion and ending up at the deepest parts of the intricate mechanisms buried underground. The first area is the Oswald's mansion, where you start your journey and also free the man-pig. This consists of two parts of the mansion and a cellar. In the cellar, you have to fix machinery to continue onward, as the gates are locked. Fixing the machinery consists of replacing the blown fuses on them with new ones to activate the gates. Once you get past the gates, you are greeted with a pressurized transport pipe. This transports you to the city outside, consisting of the alley and the church. Here you also have your first scare of the man-pig stalking you, as you had to grab the empty fuel canister to fill it and bring it back to the vehicle blocking the entrance to the church in order to move it. The church is interesting as it describes how Amanda's was doing charity to bring the poor and unfortunate together in one place, to easily take them underneath the church to be culled and recrafted. In the church, there is a small puzzle with a candle holder that you attach to the wall alongside another candle to pull them and then open up a secret passageway to the underground of the church. In this underground area, you have to sneak by the man-pig roaming in the dark, whilst being careful not to startle the victims trapped in the many cages stored there. After you descend the stairs in the church and traverse to the other side of the basement, you arrive at the meat processing factory. Here you are guided to a furnace-operated piston room with some of the pistons and furnaces not operating thanks to the saboteurs sabotaging many parts of the factory, causing it to still. After you reignite the furnaces and turn on the shut-off pistons, the lights go out and you can hear man-pig screaming. In the dark, you scramble downward, now that another gate has been lifted that previously was shut. But be careful with using the lantern you hold so dear. This can trigger the swine patrolling the area. After you get past the two monsters patrolling the second furnace room, you drop down onto a coal conveyor belt that takes you to a nearby opening that has an item elevator you crawl into. This has also been sabotaged, and you drop down with the elevator malfunction, causing you to lose consciousness. You wake up in a new area, the tunnels. This was a very interesting area as it thoroughly made me confused. As you turned your back to an entrance you walked out of, it was gone. You walked in from one entrance and came out from a completely different one. This area was most notably used by Mandas to research the properties of Compound X and the use of it to create the man-pigs. The goal here was to go to two different rooms and using air ducts to send two compounds, one part Brennenberg infusion vitae and one part orgone monad dispersal fluid, into the centrifuge in the middle of the room. This nets you a vial of Compound X you can use on the lock, keeping you from the next area. In order to burn the lock, you had to figure out that the light you could move in the operating room was solely for this purpose, not just for fun physics. One odd thing about this was that the weaving of Compound X, according to the documents, is supposed to be radioactive. However, here we were not behind any shielding. Next, you got access to the sewers, where you had to steer clear of more pigs walking the tunnels that you need to traverse to get to the valves that operate the bilges keeping the sewage trapped and blocked. This is also the first time you notice creatures living in the sewage. Failed experiments. Having released the bilges, you get access to the pressurized transport that takes you to the brief section of the pigman nest where you see how they live, interact, and grow. Through the holding cells of the man-pigs is the next crucial area you can get to, the water bilge pumps. This area only had catwalks to walk on as the entire area was flooded. The liquid that was flooding the area was infested with failed experiments, which made walking on the catwalks near water dangerous. The main thing to do here is to rebuild the pump engine that has missing cogwheels in it. After rebuilding the engine and having the water levels drop, you get access to yet another pressurized tube transport taking you to the reactor. The reactor is a massive underground hollow with an intricate machine in the middle of it with pipes going in and out. Seeing the full scale of this area makes you wonder how this was all built within 1 year. In this area, you have to send the reactor rods down into their slots in order to restart the engine to send steam back into the pipes to start the factory once more. After you switch on most of the switches, you notice one will not bite. You will have to climb down to the reactor rods to manually lift the cap on the blocked slot. What was strange about this was that the slots for the rods were engulfed in large quantities of Compound X. After you manage to get the rods in place, you can go and turn the reactor on. This is the turning point of the story so far. The engineer he has been talking to switches his persona and announces the time for redemption, no longer having to need to sway Mandus to help him restart the factory. Mandus can only cry out to the engineer asking about his children, for whom he was doing this all for. Mandus realizes he was the saboteur all along. The work he was undoing was his own to stop the machine. As memories flood in, and he once again realizes why he was the saboteur in the first place, he climbs his way back to the surface while sabotaging the machine he just restarted. First, the automatic pressure regulator has to be destroyed by removing the fuse and turning it off. This lets you get access to the main engine room, where you are blocked by steam in the main system pipes yet again. In order to lessen the steam, you have to remove the steam pipes feeding the system in 2 locations, and then breaking another steam pressure valve. This will cause an alarm to call the manpigs to investigate, and you will be chased. After this, you arrive at the surface again, and what you witness is pure horror. People in the city being murdered by manpigs swarming the city. All you can do is walk by the victims getting torn apart by the manpigs. You have a long back and forth with the engineer in dialogue, and you steel your resolve to make sure this machine you created gets destroyed and stopped completely. You start making your way back to the heart of the machine through a different access route. Taking a cage lift down, you will be met by the factory line where you see the process of turning humans into product, either as food or manpigs. To continue further, you must deal with the manpig guarding the controls of the hatch doors to different parts of the factory. You push heavy materials into the machine's mechanism, causing the area to flood. Using the light and the container of Compound X near the flooding will electrify the water, killing the manpig guarding the controls. Having access to the controls, you can continue to the trippery. In the trippery, the hallucinations and the emergence of memories and realizations keep getting stronger. You walk by the torrent of blood, until you reach the large room of blood with a single elevator in the middle. This will take you to the heart of the machine. You traverse the supply areas that keep a steady supply of whatever the machine needs to operate. This area is quite supernatural as you keep getting teleported around occasionally, having to survive an unstable pigman that is electrified and can teleport around. This manpig will be chasing you through mazes and dark rooms until you reach a dark large room with a heart in the middle of it. This heartbeat harmonizes with you as you get close to it. In order to power the room, you must climb up and make the 4 coils start spinning, after which you must come down to the heart once more only to be teleported away. This teleporting takes you to the last area of the game, the temple. You are teleported next to a body encased in a machine pod, almost as if it's keeping it alive. As you turn around, you see a catwalk that takes you to a Disney ride-like conveyor belt that starts showing the dead twins in different rooms and scenarios as the engineer starts trying to convince Mandus that they are one and that they want the same thing: to end humanity. At the end of this conveyor belt, you reach a door that opens to a very large room that holds an entire Aztec temple surrounded with machinery. This is where the engineer tries his last attempt to convince Mandus to stop and to reconsider. The engineer, the machine, starts recounting his experiences of the future in a powerfully emotional speech as you ascend the temple steps. You arrive at the top of the temple to a sacrifice table where you see your dead twin sons, 2 orbs in the air, and an empty seat for you. The engineer pleads once more to think of the children, to make their deaths have a meaning. In the end, Mandus sits on the machine and presses the button, stopping his heart, stopping his machine. The screen goes to black as you hear a whispering voice say "Daddy" one last time. You get a last look of the grand machinery that was built. with its lights going out as Mandus speaks his inner monologue of watching his machine die and hearing the city welcome the coming century. The gameplay with its puzzle and horror elements was just fine, and they did their job. However, I as a player did not take too much diligence in trying to understand the story, or read all of the documents with an analytical eye, so the story seemed bland as I played it. But as you reach the temple, your entire view of the game changes. Yes, the voice acting was good up to this point. However, the last minutes of the game really shook me to my core, as it's not every day you get to play a game so story driven, so powerful it makes you really think of what this all means. For now, I will leave you with this masterpiece of a speech.
I have stood knee-deep in mud and bone and filled my lungs with mustard gas. I have seen 2 brothers fall. I have lain with holy wars and copulated with the autumnal fallout. I have dug trenches for the refugees. I have murdered dissidents where the ground never thaws and starved the masses into pain. A child's shadow burnt into the brickwork. A house of skulls in the jungle. The innocent Mandus trod and bled and gassed and starved and beaten and murdered and enslaved. This is your coming century. They will eat the Mandus. They will make pigs of you all, and they will bury their snouts into your ribs, and they will eat your hearts. Please, Mandus, no. For your children.
I lay there and watched the god I had created die. At the end, when we were cold as the stone we had hewn his body from, when the lights were nearly all extinguished, we heard, in the silent distance, the man-pigs singing to one another. Then, as the last lights were gone, and we lay together in the deep, they drifted away, and all was silent. Such a silence I have never known. And as the dust settled on my open eyes, and we lay together embraced forever, I heard, miles above us, the sounds of the city turning over in its sleep. A church bell ringing out, and in that moment, the new century was born.
Wow, just wow. This game had no right to bring this masterpiece out of nowhere. I could watch this over and over and over. It's just beautiful. The emotion in the voice, the strings in the background. Just wow. In order to start understanding more of the ending and the masterpiece presented to us as we ascended the temple, we must first get a general idea of the past year in Mandus's life. As you progress in the story and discover the factory line as a whole, you find different notes which are out of order chronologically. I will now try to summarize and add my own thoughts as I go through the notes, starting from the year 1898. 1898. August 4th. Mandus experiments with Compound X on a dog. He injected the dog with strychnine and let the poisoning kill it. He immersed the dog in a tank of Compound X and let the alternating current run through the tank for 3.5 minutes, resulting in the revival of the animal. Sadly, the dog retains the acute state of poisoning and he is forced to end his life again. He surmises that for optimal revival, the subjects must first be drowned. I like to believe that he delved into his great uncle's work to find a way to bring his other half, Lily, back to the land of the living. November 7th. Mandus talks of his woes with the bank and his financial issues. He talks of rumors about him and the machines he has invested in, and how he will protect what is his, even if he has to kill for it. My thoughts for the reason for August 4th's experiments with Compound X is solidified more here as he expresses his need for Lily's company in these desperate times. November 29th. He finds the diaries of his great-uncle's explorations, which also mention fortunes to still be found in the Americas, where civilizations were consumed by jungles. Mandus rejects the banks and creditors and sets his mind on finding the Temple of the Stone Moon for potential profits. 1899. February 14th. Mandus speaks slowly of a local that agreed to lead him to the temple in Mexico. He mentions that his children are with him and that the old stones in the temple could hold financial benefits. February 17th. Mandus and his children talk of the temple in the jungle they now see, comparing it to the pyramids of Egypt. Mandus also talks of how the Aztecs sacrificed the hearts of many to stop the sky from falling down, pondering if they were mistaken about their belief in the sky or if they died for not being able to sacrifice enough. March 8th. The entry speaks of laying dying on the stone steps of the temple, seeing visions of grandiose machinery deep underground. He talks of being crushed by the machines of the coming century and that his machine could be better, that it could save them all. He vows to build a machine to the core of the earth. March 15th. He talks of being bedridden, sick, hearing voices from the stone of the temple as he dreams of a great machine. He talks of himself and the stone as we, signifying that they are coming one. We will build a new world from ruins of old. And I remember when we pulled into Southampton and we both wept, for it was every bit as much desecration as had been sung to me. Here, I believe, is the first mention of the man-pigs. And I gathered the servants and set on recrafting them, and then I went into the garden and buried those tiny shattered skulls. April 30th. He discovers and learns from his great-uncle's experiments on humans to potentially evolve them. Here he disagrees with his great-uncle to use a man as the subject, for they are difficult to control and rotten with sentimentality. Mandus argues that a new creature is required for what he has planned. A creature that is loyal, clever, strong, and easily sated. This is also the first and last mention of the orb. May 1st. Man-pigs are similar to the masses. They walk upright and serve a god thrust upon them. Observing the man-pigs, one thing is clear. Man is shackled and must be freed. June 3rd. I realize now that my fear of dirt stems from the disease I contracted climbing those lost jungle temples. It is as if those clean places, so free of humanity's filth, imprinted upon my soul and left it fragile to what I find here. This signifies that he is starting to see that man is a plague and a scourge on earth. I am sickened, I am ruined, but I will build such machines to contain this plague and heal us all. June 24th. In my dreams, I see a man dressed in jaguar skins and feathered like a blooded saint. This line is important later in the story as he comes to realizing his deeds as he remembers that the jaguar-faced man was him. He describes a headache and a memory he cannot remember clearly, needing opioids to keep his composure. He also speaks of hearing his children in the attic, which fills him with terror, not love. I strongly believe that at this point, the children are already dead, sacrificed at the temple in Mexico. This can be alluded to his realization that he is the jaguar-faced man and that priesthood is his alone. Priesthood, of course, referencing the Aztec priests that were tasked with sacrificial hearts. July 15th. Mandas writes of his experiments to create man-pigs, writing down a chemical compound recipe which aids in fusing together and maintaining the bonding after reassembly. He talks more about the compound on how it is reactive to light and can even destroy small quantities of metal. August 1st. Notes of the first failed pigment experiments that escaped to the sewers where they now live. These failures have supernatural aspects to them. They move between worlds unintentionally. August 19th. Enhanced description of one part of Compound X's recipe. Mandas mentions reviving his dead sons, but this shouldn't be possible as his earlier experiments prove. August 20th. Took delivery of another batch of imbeciles today. They are the sorriest specimens of humanity I have ever seen. Mandas has started mass producing man-pigs using outcasts of the city no one will miss. We give them laudanum to pacify them. They wait in line, livestock. Dull brown eyes and filthy skin. Many soil themselves as they wait. Into the manipulator they file in silence. I hear the hissing of gas, I hear the dull groaning as teeth are removed, as bones reset. I hear pigs screaming. Afterwards, when they sleep, I walk amongst them. My children, I whisper to their dreams. You are my children now. I have children once again, and your forms imperfect will be the engines to make my own blood flow again. Here he clearly states that his children are not in this world anymore. He also mentions the man-pigs being the engines to make his blood flow again. I assume the manpower the man-pigs provides will start getting him closer and closer to the completion of his grand design. August 22nd. Mentions of digging underground and mentions of the earth having a molten core of iron. August 31st. Mandas speaks of using child labor from orphanages to clean the veins and arteries of the machine without a single drop of guilt or empathy towards them. The survivors tell me you can reach all manner of places within the complex through the pipes. I smile, tell them I am so proud, and then feed them to the pigs. September 11th. Mention of an architect and the new power source of the factory that provides surplus energy for their needs. Mandas has not been to the deeper parts of the factory and instead sends workers deeper into the factory to continue building it. The workers that can no longer work are disposed of. We dispose of the bodies beneath the chapel in an old medieval plague pit, which seems appropriate. They are covered with burns and strange growths upon the skin that blister and split when they are moved. The smell is quite overwhelming. I assume Mandas has achieved nuclear power as the description sounds like radiation burns. This idea is solidified further with the need for clean water for the dissipation of heat. All we require for the new power source is a steady supply of clean water, which we are diverting from the sewers. Our entire enterprise is thus built on human waste. September 28th. He describes humans in the city as filthy, horrid pigs, utterly debased, and rejects them completely. He instead proposes that what is seeked is a machine no less than a deity that has the sole purpose of cleaning the world and setting humanity free. He rejects the government and the men of power in it, letting the so-called pigs of the city have their final days of filth enjoyed. October 11th. Upgrades to the factory, more specifically the conveyor line tasked with supplying humans to the factory line to be processed. Adding laudanum derivative, an opioid, to the feed to subdue the product before starting the process. Further increasing efficiency by adding classical music like Debussy to the conveyor line to calm them even further. October 17th. More upgrades to the efficiency and intricate nature of the factory. He explains the stunning of the live products using built-up static electricity. October 18th. A simple stroke of genius. He thought to harvest the digestive gases of the product to produce more power for the factory. October 21st. Description of the system's spring-loaded blades that bleed the product in the factory processing line. October 22nd. Describes of a solution to keep the reactor and the processed products cool. Explains the system of capturing and removing the heat via conduction panels that send heat where it is needed through a maze of pipes. October 23rd. Description of scalding the hair and skin of the product and removing the viscera via the power of vacuums. October 24th. Speaks of inviting people of power and status to dine, seemingly feeding them humans that have gone through the processing line. However, this could just be an exaggeration and they could just be eating regular pig roast, as it seems too simple of a leap in logic. Aside from feeding the wealthy, he also drugs them to throw them to the processing line with the rest of the victims. October 25th, Part 1. Mandus voices his frustrations with the privileged. October 25th, Part 2. Mandus speaks of how the poor are not trusting of his charity, and sets to construct traps along the streets to capture victims en masse. October 25th, Part 3. Talks of his meat business growing and it being exported to fatten the rich for the purpose of culling them later. He talks of how the poor will not be missed but the rich will in time, so he must be careful. October 27th, Part 1. Description on how he caged the drugged members of wealth in the beds of his mansion after the many feasts he hosted. October 27th, Part 2. Explanation of how the factory keeps the mansion he lives in so very warm. November 23rd. Mandus talks of Father Jeremiah of the church. He thought he could tell Father Jeremiah the secret in confidence, however he was mistaken. He sentences Father Jeremiah to the processing line alongside the poor he housed in the church. December 1st. In a very Gollum-esque way, this letter writes of Mandus being born into a wealthy family and giving this life for his children as well, as could be surmised from the saying, being born with a silver spoon in one's mouth. In the end, it describes in a gruesome way how the fruits of his labors are sourced from the deaths of his wife and children. December 2nd. The notes are getting very vague and symbolic, and becoming more and more up to one's interpretation. I see this as his subconscious psyche making him sick from the guilt of what he did to his children in Mexico without memories of it, and then seemingly grieving in a place in the garden akin to the scene in Mexico. December 15th. Mandus questions the architecture of the machine in a poetic way. December 20th. Mandus complains of a Professor A who will be coming to visit him to ascertain his well-being. Mandus is paranoid at this point. There are mentions of Jack, specifically Jack the Ripper. I believe that he is Jack the Ripper, thinking of possibly letting the professor meet Jack and his sons. In this context, the sons are probably the man-pigs, as noted in the note from August 20th. December 23rd. He dialogues with himself in the mirror, comparing himself to men of power that send men to die in battle. He argues himself lesser of the two evils. There are mentions of being Ubermensch, which I take it to mean he has understood his meaning in life and that he has rejected religion. As one interpretation of Friedrich Nietzsche states. December 25th. His veil of evil has started to lift from his mind, as he writes to himself that he knows what he has done, seemingly admitting to have murdered his children at the temple in Mexico, and that in order to redeem himself of his evils, he must take this machine he built down. December 27th. I understand this as his soul was split into two from seeing the horrors of the future. He symbolically says, "Both halves still living, but the guts kept falling onto my children." Almost as saying the part of the machine is trampling on their deaths, as they were trying to make their lives mean more than just not. This note, in my opinion, opens up the possibility that most parts of his psyche were pushed down in his consciousness to allow him to continue working for the progress of the orb he found in Mexico. December 28th. Seemingly admits that the death of Lily, his wife, created the drifting of his two thoughts, love and hate. Love for his children, and hate for the world that took his wife. He ponders if the only path to redemption is to stop the machine, and to forgive himself alongside the other half of him in the machine. December 29th. He ponders if he's worthy of living, worthy of being forgiven and having a possible future, or if the only path for him is to die and take his deeds and creations with him. He talks of live wires in between his suicidal thoughts, almost as if he's contemplating stopping his heart, but ultimately chooses to sabotage the machine in hopes of starting a new life in the coming century. This timeline gives a broad perspective of how his plans vaguely progressed. Whenever I talk about the orbs and side effects caused by them or their functions, I am using wiki information that have general documentation from other games. This gives me more clues to what could have happened. About the orb shortly. They play a major role in all the games in the Amnesia series. If someone inexperienced handles an orb, it is very likely to shatter and rarely evaporate into nothing. Orb shards bleed madness and can be used as instruments of torture in and of themselves. Not only can shards reveal the future, but can disrupt the wielder's own spirit, splitting it. From my understanding, the story goes as follows. Mandus was a local butcher during the Industrial Revolution in London who invested in machinery to grow his business. His wife Lily died while giving birth to their twin sons. He had up and down financial difficulties which ultimately led him to travel to Mexico in search of riches described in his great-uncle's writings. He traveled with his two boys who were old enough to walk and talk to Mexico and managed to find a guide to the Aztec temple he was searching for, the Temple of the Stone Moon. Arriving and exploring the temple, he was most likely taking control of evil powers of the orb, as he was still a broken man from the passing of his wife and the stress of his business, making him mentally vulnerable. To me, it seems most plausible that the Aztecs were worshipping the orb at some point in time and were also under the influence of it. Mandus was probably similarly taken a hold of by the orb after the orb shattered due to his inexperience with the orbs. As per the wiki information, the shards of the orbs emit madness, and the act of shattering can also shatter the person's psyche. Violence and cruelty from the coming century were shown to him. He was shown the horrors his sons must endure in the Battle of Somme, and he was possibly given a solution to his fear and dread of the future. Whilst desperate and in a maddened state, he had to make due to the promise he made to Lily, to always protect their sons even if it meant killing them. So that is what he did. After having shown the future where his sons died grueling horrible deaths in the Battle of Somme, he did the only thing that he could think of in the moment, releasing them from their mortal coils. Long after, he woke on the temple steps under a crueling sun, not aware of what had happened. All he knew was that his sons were dead, with the orb shard in his pocket, without memory of any of it. Having lost his memories would benefit the orb, as he would be more easily manipulated into doing what the orb wants. Having lost his memories of the deed is supported by the fact that he had no knowledge of the future shown to him afterwards. Instead, he relies on the engineer, his other evil mad half in the shard, to be the one to steer this mission. Mandus wants, at most, to bring salvation to the whores, beggars, and orphans that so desperately cling to a god for a better tomorrow, but he was not fully aware that this meant killing them all in the end. I strongly believe that the shard he took with him is connected to him through the soul and mind, the shard holding the part of his consciousness alongside the memories he lost after arriving at the temple, like the murdering of his sons and the visions of the future he was shown. I also believe that the shard and Mandus share a mind space that allows them to communicate efficiently, making the dialogue between them over large distances all the more logical. This is a crucial point in my take on the story. Many believe that the sons were sacrificed at the end of the year, since there are two entries in the documents from the boys' diaries dated October 3rd and October 11th, as well as the temple scenery at the end of the game. However, I strongly believe that in his delirious state, most of the visuals in the end of the game were probably abstract interpretations of his decisions and thoughts at the time. There is no real telling what was real and what was not. However, I see fit to ignore these entries by the twins, as they contradict too many of the other signs that they have been dead for a longer amount of time. These are the reasons why I think this is the case. August 20th, he calls the man-pigs his new children, and that he is happy that he has children once again. There was also a voice recording of him and the professor talking. The professor said, "I do understand what you have been through. A lesser man would have crumbled." To me, this seemed odd. Mandus's wife has been dead for multiple years at this point. So to me, it didn't really seem to fit that he said that at this time. However, if we were to take account the recent passing of his children, it would make a lot more sense. This was followed by Mandus replying with, "What else was I to do? fall into grief, pine and fade into my hopelessness, stating that he is fully aware of what he has lost and instead chooses to dive into his work. There was also the clear stating that Mendes killed his children by the engineer as they were talking at the very end of the game. There was also a removed note from the game from a child worker cleaning the pipes that mentioned seeing well-dressed twin boys helping the children escape. This relates to the note dated August 29th. The death of the children at the temple would also support more of the fact that his mind has been poisoned by evil forces. He could have done anything else to try and save them from the future, but he chose the most violent one. Additionally, I have to mention the note of August 19th, where he talks of reviving his sons using a mysterious concoction I assume to be Compound X. I don't think this is possible. All facts indicate the sons were killed gruesomely and buried by the temple. If it were possible to revive long dead creatures that were not at least refrigerated, he would have revived his wife, but he says it is too late for her. I believe in Mexico at the temple, when the orb shattered, it caused Mendes' soul to split, incorporating one part of his soul into the shard. And later on, as he killed his twins, a part of the twins also was incorporated into the shard. This would explain a lot why they were seen as ghosts by many in the machine. After arriving back to London from Mexico, he starts to spiral into more and more evil thoughts. He started to believe that the world was truly unclean, with man as the filth. For a short period, it does seem that he wants to help the poor and the unfortunate by giving them a paradise and salvation. However, this quickly turns into that salvation and paradise being a death sentence, albeit he tries to pity them by making the process as humane as possible, in this context by pacifying and calming them before processing. So he sets his sights on building the machinery that the engineer, his evil self in the shard, describes to him. For this he requires a workforce that does not tire or rebel. He requires the man-pigs. He starts his man-pig research on the servants in his home by dwelling into his great-uncle's research and past experiments with Compound X. This ultimately leads him to creating the man-pig through trial and error. As the man-pigs start to become more useful, the construction can truly start speeding up. I assume he focuses his efforts first on the man-pig production, for the efficiency is ever multiplying as the man-pigs kidnap and trap victims to become more of his workers. This can be supported by the fact he starts charity work to gather them up, festivals to create openings to abduct them from the streets, and being sent workforces consisting of societal rejects no one will miss. He gets so obsessed with his own work, he starts neglecting the social parts of his life, like not taking part of the men's club he used to frequent. This causes the professor from the club to come check on his health. During his stay with Mendes tells him about his trip to Mexico, his beliefs of the current world, and the machinery he has been building underneath the city alongside the engineer. The professor does not seem appalled by it and actively engages in conversation, even seeking to meet this engineer who has seen the future. However, the professor's fate is not of sunshine and flowers, as Mendes is so paranoid of the world taking his grand design away from him, like the world did his family, that he incapacitates the professor, sending him to be processed like everyone else that got in his way. As his workforce of wretches increases, so does his underground empire of steam and machinery. He constructs steam systems powered by a reactor that creates steam from human waste and water. At this point, I assumed a fragment of the orb was also placed inside of the machinery to give it some sort of sentience and control over its systems. However, that was never really seen since he needed Mendes to fix his sabotage systems. But as the massacre happened, the engineer calls himself the city itself, as it is intertwined with the machinery, as well as the engineer saying that he will split the atom and the Earth's core, likely meaning nuclear holocaust he can create on his own. This would further support the soul incorporation of the twins into the shard, as they could be seen by Mendes and by others inside the machinery, likely Mendes seeing them thanks to the shared mind space, and others thanks to the orb shard in the heart of the machine. After dealing so long with the poor and the rejected, he sets his eyes on the rich and privileged, being utterly sick and disgusted by how they treat the poor and how they are also filthy, same as the lowest class in the city, only difference being that they hide their ugliness behind a facade of wealth. He gets into their good graces through his butchering business and fattens them with the flesh of the poor he has processed, also inviting them to banquets hosted at his mansion. only to be drugged and fed to the same processing line many of the citizens have passed through. Ultimately, come December, he starts to crack. The veil starts lifting and his memories want to resurface. I believe that during December, he started working less around the shard, and the engineers started needing him less and less, as the machinery was getting built without Mandus having to intervene. This causes the effects of the shard to reduce and reduce, causing him to start doubting himself and his mission. This weakening of the madness clouding his actions arrived at its peak come December 29th, where he truly starts grasping the dire actions he has committed. Memories flooding in of his wife and children and the victims of his work make him suffer to the point he starts contemplating ending it all to stop the machine and to atone for his crime via death, deciding ultimately to not stop his heart and to continue living in hopes of truly helping people in the coming century to atone for his sins. He sets on sabotaging the engineer's goal. While it's getting deeper and deeper, he switches whatever he could find off in haste. He gets caught by a wretch that drugs him and takes him back to the mansion to sleep. This is also where the game starts and you wake up with amnesia. I strongly believe that the mixture of the trauma he experienced and the drugs he was administered made his entire year be suppressed to the point he remembers everything up to leaving for Mexico, as he believes his children really are alive still. The engineer being halted is clever. During the first communications after Mandus wakes, he makes sure that Mandus does not recognize him, and uses his belief of his children being alive to tempt him to restart the great machinery deep underground. During all this time, Mandus was helping the engineer get rid of Mandus' own sabotaging attempts. The engineer remains polite and helpful, yet mysterious enough to not trigger any memories to make him stop. What supports Mandus not having any memories of the past year is that he questions his whereabouts at times when he reaches the deeper parts of the underground systems, being in utter disbelief of the magnitude of the systems. He also confirmed at times when he listens to audio recordings and memories that he's not the one that said them, likely not having memories of them anymore, and of course by the fact that he believes the children are still alive. However, on his journey to re-establish the machinery, it's confusing why the wretches were trying to stop Mandus. Perhaps this alludes to the note of April 30th, that they are sentient, but need a god to follow to do their work. The god of course being the machine and the orb shard with the engineer's consciousness in it. They were just doing their job of handling the systems, and Mandus in their eyes was an intruder. The descent to the core of the machine eventually starts to reveal his memories once more to the horrors of the past year he has committed. The final nail in the coffin being the total revival of the machinery systems, where the engineer loses its calm demeanor and emerges to enact atrocities on the surface. Mandus connects the dots that he was the saboteur all along. He makes his way back up to the surface in hopes that his children would be there, but he emerged to a city entering purgatory. The engineer seems completely mad and is enjoying the moment of life being sapped away from the streets and being supplied to the factory processes. Mandus only sees one possible solution, and that is to go back to finish what he started when he sabotaged it once already. As he once again reaches closer and closer to the heart of the system, he remembers more and more of his acts as he visibly gets more and more disassociated with reality. This brings us to the last stages of the story. As he gets to the trippery, he is seen walking the torrents of blood to a room with an elevator. This is already starting to lose sense. Why would there be an elevator in a Viscera collection room? Regardless, he uses this to get to the system's supply area, which I believe to be a figment of his imagination and an abstract way of showing his thoughts and actions. In this area, he finally reaches a room with a heart in the middle of it. When he got close to the heart, his own heart started beating faster and stronger as his vision got blurry. In my opinion, I think of this as his literal heart that he wishes to stop. I can see why the engineer would start getting panicked and mad seeing or feeling Mandus think of this. If Mandus dies, his soul would also die within the machine as they are one. This can be alluded to a note calling the twins one soul living in two bodies, and many other mentions of bifurcations and splitting of self. Duality and splitting is a common theme in the game. As the room with his heart in it starts to get powered up, he gets visibly teleported to another space. I believe what happened was that Mandus was powering up a machine that would stop his heart. Before he could continue with it, his consciousness was ripped to the shared mind space between the shard and the engineer and Mandus. Here Mandus stands by a life support machine with a man inside, almost symbolizing his one half of the soul being the machine he built with his weak and sickly body inside the machine. Here Mandus walks to see a representation slideshow of memories as the engineer pleads with him in hopes to brainwash him and to side with him once more. This is ultimately where Mandus accepts that his children are dead and that he was the one to kill them. As the engineer says, "I did not kill your children, Mandus. You sacrificed them on the temple steps knowing what the coming century would do to them. Your sons will drown, lungs full of mud and shrapnel, on the banks of the Somme. You wanted to save them from the horrors to come. This is the vision we shared. Everything we have built to avert this coming nightmare. You and I are one. We are the same. Our souls are entangled. We deserve to make them free." This conveyor belt dialogue was also a very strong indication that Mandus and the engineer share a soul, but have differing personalities and memories. Mandus does not yield, and what awaits him are the temple steps he started this tragic year with. As he ascends the stairs, the engineer spills his heart of which he has witnessed and lived through. Mandus has lost the will to live and ignores the engineer as his decision to end his life was adamant. He sits on the machine that he powered up and presses the button to end his life, alongside it ending the machines. However, I don't believe he really died. I believe his entire soul got incorporated into the orb's shard, simply fusing his two halves together and trapping him in it alongside his children. I believe this to be the case as he speaks his final speech where he mentions lying there together in the dark and mentioning being conscious of the city entering the new century. This would also be sort of poetic as he would have to serve a sentence of time in solitude and darkness. Perhaps the length of the sentence he must carry is equal to the years the lives he took could have lived, making him trapped there for eons. And maybe he has to do it alone, with his children perhaps being freed of the shard. But who knows? In the end, Mandus was a good-hearted man, wanting good for everyone despite his losses. His own two hands couldn't produce a shred of good in the world. Instead, the only good he brought the world was ending his own life, never being able to atone for the lives he took or the lives he could have saved in the future. But he alone was not to blame. It could have been anyone to find the orb he found. He was just unfortunate enough to find his great uncle's belongings, setting him on the path of corruption and evil. This was of course solely my own interpretation of the game's storyline, and I could be entirely wrong. This is just a way that makes sense to me how I think the story went. I may have missed elements to the story as it is very philosophical and poetic, and it's natural to find more and more meanings as you reread the entirety of the story. One thing is for sure, there is a strong opinion of capitalism in the story as it talks a lot of eating the rich and using the poor, alongside mentions of God and Friedrich Nietzsche. I have always thought that people saying graphics don't matter and that story and gameplay do were full of it. I admit I still feel that way, but my outlook on it has changed after playing older games that can be seen as having lesser graphics. A Machine for Pigs was similar. It didn't have the graphics that wowed you, but it had a style that emitted an unpolished and uneasy atmosphere that enhanced the horror aspects of the story. As for the gameplay, it really was just a vehicle to tell a story and nothing much else. Sure, it had you do puzzles and that was fine, but puzzles I think are a hard aspect to get right in games. You don't want them to be too hard so the player loses interest and gets frustrated, and you also don't want them to be too easy for the same reason. Getting that sweet spot is difficult, and I don't think this game hit it exactly. Maybe it wasn't even meant to be perceived as puzzles, just tasks that intertwined with the story's narrative. The Saboteur. So we have touched on the graphics and gameplay, but there's also the audio, theatrics and story. When talking about the audio, I think it was really well executed. The music was enjoyable and got me to feel something, like the eerie anxiety-inducing sounds playing in some parts, and the orchestrated instruments playing during the church walkthrough and when walking up the temple steps at the very end. We also can't forget the well-done voice acting, especially prominent with the engineer. The emotions and range gave it so much life in my opinion that it made me really invested in what he had to say. Lastly, the story. It's not always a game tries to tell you a compelling story. Many games are just trying to get you to play it by inducing as much ADHD fun as possible. Some try to teach you something, and some try to entertain you with complex stories. And that is alright. Games are entertainment just like videos, movies, books, and etc. They can teach you or entertain you with comedy and drama, just like any game could, and just like Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs did. Now, I don't pretend to be someone that is highly knowledgeable of history or philosophy, so I can't appreciate the story to its fullest extent. But that is fine. I think if I even tried a second of my time to interpret and understand the story presented to me, then the creators would be satisfied. All in all, I don't regret playing it, and look forward to playing more story-driven games. But I also can't give it a higher end score. So for now, we will suffice with, let's see. It's nice. Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice game. If you made it this far, thank you. And I'm sorry. I don't really know what I wanted to accomplish with this video. It took a long time to make and made me lose my train of thoughts many times, as I kept rewriting my theories and noting down my evolving interpretations of the notes. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and like, and maybe give Amnesia a try yourself to ponder about its contents like I did, and who knows, maybe you'll find something new.